We're called Minot, and that's M-I-N-O-T. It's frequently mispronounced because nobody knows what Minot actually is. But it's the name of a town in western North Dakota, and I just always liked the sound of it, so I thought it would make a good band name, and I somehow managed to convince these guys that it was acceptable. I think that neither of them really put a high premium on band names anyway, so they were just like, all right, whatever, Minot. Let's call it that. We started the band when we all lived in the Bay Area, and we rehearsed here in Oakland. But I ended up moving to Asheville, North Carolina, but we decided we wanted to keep going with it, and I flew out to the West Coast to record this album that we're touring on now, Equal Opposite, and we liked the way it turned out, so we're still a band. Together in a band called the Turks, and I played bass and Shannon played drums, and that was very like sort of Chicago precision punk, kind of Jesus Lizardy kind of stuff, and it was fun to play, but it wasn't exactly breaking new ground musically, and we really wanted to do that, so we had this dynamic where I was the bassist for Turks, but with Minot that same dynamic of playing really rhythmic, pattern-oriented stuff definitely like took hold of Shannon and I, and we played together a few times, and it was obvious that we wanted to keep making this kind of music. And then we tried a few bassists and nothing really worked, and then we heard Ben play with Tartufi. He stepped in and just started basically improvising over music or impromptu bass playing over music that was already really complicated. And we heard that, and we heard his bass tone, and we were like, that's going to sound awesome with this band.
Yeah, it's interesting to have, Shannon's drumming is really very complicated and he makes very complicated beats sound very intuitive. You get like a lot of natural rhythm out of the way that he plays, and the way that Matthew kind of creates very rhythmic, repetitive guitar parts. And there's a lot of pretty melody and stuff in there, but really like, the main basic tracks that he's putting down are very, very rhythmic, and that's something that like a bass player normally would do. That really, Yeah. And so it's almost like we're all kind of a one big rhythm section in a way, but then the typical rhythm section takes a lot of the way that I play bass sort of lends itself well to taking more of like a noodly type lead in a lot of situations like this, and playing off of Shannon's drums and the pads that Matt creates really allows me for a lot of like room to move around certain pieces and do atypical bass lines.
Probably stems from just like a lot of other musicians, being 13-year-old kid who, I think my dad I think he said something like, I got to get this kid something to let his aggression out, and then I think that's when a little drum set showed up, and then I
little drum,
the Tama Rockstar probably, I bet it was, and I just then it's like, okay, I'm 13, what am I supposed to listen to? Okay, well, I guess Metallica. Yeah. So then I start learning all the metal and all that. Yeah. And that was that whole, you get up to about 19 and you either live in that world forever, or I sort of got to my limit of knowing how to play all that. And I played in Florida in hair metal bands, but I had reached my limit of drumming and that scene there, which still exists the same way it did 20 years ago, which is great. But I then started getting turned on to, lots of other music besides metal, which I still love. But you find something like the Melvins, and so I start to realize, wow, okay, I see metal can be played in a lot of different ways and presented in a lot of different ways. So that changed my drumming, and then all of a sudden, somebody handed me Dom Caballero, and that was like, oh wow, okay, I can actually, you can really get tricky. You can take a 4/4 guitar part and on the drums just have a field day and just do whatever you want. If I can land on that one every time, nothing else matters. But this music that we're playing is exactly like that for me as a drummer. I get to do that, and I'm sure often too much,
And I didn't really know what, and the bass honestly just seemed way easier than the guitar, so I just got a bass. And the stuff that I was listening to at the time was like, I had just found a lot of hardcore bands, like all the stuff that was on Victory at that point. Like I really got into, heavier, louder music always appealed to me. All kinds of music appeals to me now, but especially as a kid, like it was like as extreme as it could be, or like as heavy as it could be. That was the stuff that was interesting to me. And then playing bass, it was just like I took a few lessons when I was a kid, but then kind of fell off from that and just had one. It was like try to play along with records that I had, always playing with my fingers. Never really was never good. And then like that band Candiria, I found them, and that kind of changed the game for me. And it was like, all right, this is the stuff I like. I love this. I want to play. It's just interesting. I always want to play with my fingers. This is like a jazz bass player playing, the bass player for that band came from this New York hardcore band called Marauder from before, and he just was playing this, Marauder's real simple, very simple, but Candiria is very technical and complex. That was very interesting to me. Going into college, I had a bass, and by virtue of having a bass and being like the only kid that had one, I got invited to play in bands. Two of the kids that came from all those bands, we always got picked up and put in other people's bands. And from there, we had a band called Low Red Land. It had just formed in Boston. We wrote some demos, moved out here, and got to know a few friends' bands. And I really got into playing the bass as sort of a melodic thing as well, keeping a low end, but also, making it a little more complicated chording, doing arpeggios, doing leady stuff, not boring bass lines. And our drummer, I learned how to playing with this kid, was constantly pushing me, and I was pushing him. At a certain point, it got to the point where we were making each other learn more. But just playing with him and trying to match what he was doing with his right and left hands, or his right hand and his right foot. And now to get a chance to apply that to a situation like this, where there's a lot of similarities in the way that Low Red Land's drummer played and the way that Shannon plays. Very intuitive feeling, but interesting ways of interpreting beats.
You guys are both way heavier than me in terms of music.
Weight.
In terms of weight.
Fat dudes.
Gigantic. And yeah, I never wanted to play in, well, I've played in super heavy bands, but I don't really want to do that anymore. So these guys have the ability to bring this super heavy, violent, just crushing rhythm sound to this band. But I, in terms of guitar playing, want to try and counter that by playing stuff that's maybe not as distorted, right, or lighter or prettier or whatever. And yeah, it's weird with, I mean, they're both super metalheads, and I like metal also, but I feel dwarfed in comparison with the metal. And this dude has an encyclopedic knowledge of all things rock. And so even just listening to you talk in the interview, I learn who the fuck is Marauder?
He knows.
No, Master Killer is a great record.
Name everyone in the band probably.
It'll make you lift all the weights. That record, you put that on, you're like, I lifted all the weights. Well done.
Masses with my friend Francis, who played drums, and the bassist Sergio Robledo Matarazzo. And we were a band for 10 years. That was a lot of fun, and it was really rewarding. And after 10 years, though, I really wanted something completely new. I started doing the Minot project, but I had no idea that it was going to grow into a real band. I just wanted a way to write songs and experiment with some new ideas, music that was different than anything I had done before. And I don't think that Minot is a complete departure from For Monuments Masses, especially not guitar-wise, but it's a change in a lot of different ways, and I like it. I really like playing in Minot. I have been really interested in post-rock, in instrumental post-rock. I think there was a time when I was playing music and people called it post-rock, and I was like, cool, I belong to some genre. There's a name for what I do, and I thought that was really cool. And so I listened to a lot of post-rock bands, and I've got to admit that post-rock bands, I don't know, when 5-10 years ago, all started sounding the same to me. And I don't really mean that as a diss of any bands. It's just kind of like, maybe I'm tapped out. Like, I can't really listen to bands that sound like explosions in the sky.
That's true with any genre, really.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a sound of a, I mean.
Right. There's only,
there's speed metal bands are going to sound like speed metal bands.
Right.
Right.
And they're always going to be the ones that do it really well, and there are going to be
Yeah.
a bunch of other ones that also
Yeah.
do it well, but it's just not as good, and therefore you don't need them.
Right. Well, the reason I bring it up is because it's really important to me as an instrumental band that plays with dynamics and has this really kind of I don't know, wall of sound and, you know, atmospheric. I guess some of our music is atmospheric, and as such, it's really important to me to avoid those tropes that make post-rock because they're just used up. So it's important to me in Minot to try and write stuff that doesn't sound like other bands.